everybody. Welcome to Friday Night Bingo with WikiTree. And I have brought a project that I think we have booked about 2 months ago, maybe. So I'm really excited to welcome Cindy and Giselle with the Acadian Project to WikiTree Bingo. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
This is really exciting. Now, for those of you that are, let me fix my hair. See, we were talking about fixing hair earlier. So for those of you that are in the project, definitely give us a shout out and let us know that you're in the project. For those of you that definitely know that you have Acadian in your family line, give us a shout out as well. And for those of you that are curious if you have some in your line, give us a shout out in the chat as well, because what we're going to do is something a little different with this bingo than we normally do. We have a ladies' night tonight, and we're going to separate this into two parts. A little bit of history at first, play bingo, and then a look at the notables that we normally look at and talk about research for this particular group and project. And my guests are going to trade off with the chatting with you live and also chatting with me live. So let's go ahead and get started here. I want to introduce you to the project page. I love your page, by the way. I meant to tell you this earlier that your page is very easy to understand. I am not familiar with Acadians like I should be. I know just the real basics. I could probably give you 2-sentence worth. So I love going to your page and seeing everything laid out so I can understand what this project's about. And I guess let's start with this map.
Yeah. So that map gives you a depiction of what Acadia looked like at the beginning. That's not the date of the map, but those are all of the areas that Acadia covered, starting all the way with the northern half of Maine was actually the very earliest settlements of Acadia were in that area. And then the French expanded into Nova Scotia, which is the main part of the map. And then what we would know as PEI today and Cape Breton today. We also covered the lower southern half of New Brunswick.
I was a little bit surprised about the Maine.
Yeah, well, for Americans, we've got the Acadian National Park there in Maine. And sometimes I think it's a little misplaced because the main body of Acadia was Nova Scotia. But the early formation of Acadia was in Maine.
Interesting. And I will tell you a little joke going on inside my family. My husband is a Crockett in his line, very close. I think it's his great-grandmother. I don't research his line, but his great-grandmother. So when I was telling him about your project coming on, he was all excited because he related it to Louisiana.
Yes.
So he's like, well, that's why I love my Cajun food. And I'm like, but dear, your family never even touched Louisiana or Maine or Canada. So it's kind of interesting how you see the pockets, I guess. So he's very excited to learn if his family is also part of the Acadians. And let's go ahead then and talk a little bit so everybody knows about the project itself. Project page is set up like all project pages on WikiTree, very similar. Go to the project page. I've dropped a link, and it's all the way at the top of the chat. So if you've joined late, all you got to do is scroll back up and see it. On a project page on WikiTree, right in the middle, there's a box, and it shows you everything that you need to do to join the page. But Cindy's going to give us some information on what is required to join.
Yeah. Well, because the Acadians lived so long ago, the conventions around Acadians and the resources around Acadians are somewhat specialized. And so we expect that people come with a little bit of knowledge. First of all, you have to do the basics, like sign the honor code.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like you to be a member for at least 30 days so that you've learned how WikiTree itself works, so that you've got the navigation and some of the conventions of WikiTree under your belt. And for that reason, we also require at least 100 contributions so that we can see you've been active and have had a chance to learn how a WikiTree works. Then
in source, that's one thing that got a lot of new people to WikiTree to understand the requirements for sourcing. And I want to mention that real quick, that on the second half after the first bingo game, we're going to talk about that researching for this particular group and sources.
Yeah, and that's why we ask that people be pre-1700 certified, because many Acadians are pre-1700 profiles.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to a really good point that I want to bring up. Again, this page was fantastic about telling me everything I need to know about your project, but the group as well, and the culture. You'll notice that the project box, the sticker, is here, and you do make it clear that the Acadians who lived in Acadia prior to the end of 1763, they do get this project box.
They do. So our project has many profiles because we put that box on all Acadians, and then Giselle and I monitor the activity for those profiles, partly because it's easy to make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's easy to get families conflated. And so we review everything. But what I would emphasize is that all of the profiles are open because people lived so long ago, and they can all be edited.
That's a really interesting point. I do not think I've had a project on that has that circumstance. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That kind of I had to pause there for a second to think about that, because they have passed, and it's past the certain deadline for WikiTree for when the profiles have to be open. And I love too that you've given us the codes for the stickers. So if they are migrating, if they're a descendant as well. So if somebody's in chat today that has Acadian ancestors, they can use that descendant of Acadian sticker, correct?
Yes, they can. And people today do think of themselves as Acadians.
Mm-hmm.
So our using that time period is because it's about the project.
Okay.
So the original time period is what the project is all about. And that is not to say that people today are not Acadians. They are.
But you're focusing on this section.
Yes, our project is defined. We also include a few other people after 1763 who were deported to France and ended up in Louisiana. And so there's a place down there called the Wall of Names. And that, if they're on the Wall of Names, they also are defined as Acadian.
Okay.
And all the siblings, everybody in the family.
So in that family, so would grandkids, if they're on the Wall of Names, that grandkids would not, just the people that.
All the siblings.
Okay. And I do want to point out, now I know this is kind of cheating, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but before I forget, I really just don't want to forget this because it's important. It may come up in the bingo game, it may not, but could you just briefly tell us about the women's name and the middle name?
Yeah, so Acadian women were at the forefront of using their own names. Before they started, the French people did and still do that. And the French Acadians did that as well. So a woman is born with her last name at birth, and she uses that name her whole life.
Okay.
And now middle names.
Yeah.
So many Americans think of, you have a first name and a middle name. But again, the French all have one compound first name if they have multiple names. And I've spoken with some present day people who say, oh, I have 4 or 5 names. And they're all considered a first name.
That's what I was going to say. So for WikiTree and for the convention, it would all go in the first name field, and the middle name field would be empty.
Correct. There's actually a radio button where you can say no middle name.
And then now, could you tell us a little bit about this? What is DIT?
Yeah. I hope I'm going to say it right, Giselle. D name. Is that, how do you say it?
D name.
D. Okay, the D name. So that word, if it were translated, means said, which basically is like another name, like a nickname.
Mm-hmm.
Most D names are associated with the last name. So they might be born with a certain last name at birth, but then they use this D name to identify themselves more uniquely. And so that would go in their current last name if they actually used it in their life. And then there are a few, many fewer, but some that have a D name for a nickname.
And would you put that in the nickname field? Just
Yeah.
like, okay, so that we're kind of familiar with. And I'm going to let everybody, make sure you go to the project page. I'm going to let everybody kind of look on their own as well, because we're going to talk more about this on the second half after the first bingo game. But I was so worried that we would forget those 3 items, and I didn't want to forget those particular items. Let me come back up. So can you tell us, for somebody who really doesn't know, like myself, I know a little bit about it. I know that the deportation, I know the general areas where they came from and where they went. But can you give us just a little history on these people?
Yeah, so they came from France, starting in the early 1600s. And there were numerous waves of people coming in. But then the growth began organically as they started families and had children and so on. But it was not a very big community. In 1671, we had our first census. I say we, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and there were about 500 people enumerated. And so many Acadians are related to each other because the communities were really small.
So then you have endogamy as well. We were talking about endogamy tool with ex-friends with Greg earlier today. We talk about it in my project as well a lot. Italy, I know, talks about it. So it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I find when I'm working on Acadian profiles, I'm cousins to so many. They started, as I had said before, in Maine. They moved their capital to Nova Scotia in about mid 1600s, Giselle. And that was known as Port Royal. And then they spread out some major communities from there. So Grand Pre, Beaubassin, hopefully I'm saying those right. Those became important large communities kind of as offshoots of Port Royal. Then they didn't really begin populating Ile Saint-Jean and Ile Royale until the deportations happened. Those became the places people went to get away from the English in Nova Scotia. And then from the deportations, really, Acadians were sent so many places. Most of the English colonies, now US states, received Acadians. That's what you see in blue there. They were sent all along that coast, and not all those communities wanted them.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They were very poorly treated. Many of them were, a nice word for it is indentured or forced into labor. We might call that slavery today.
Was it because they were farm workers, or not of nobility?
They arrived with no possessions.
Mm-hmm.
They were forced out of their homes, often just wearing the pajamas they had on. They weren't able to bring anything, really.
So
even
true refugees.
Records were lost during that time. Some of them were deported to England and imprisoned there. Many were sent to France. And from France came back and ended up in Louisiana. And that's how we got the Cajuns, was from France.
And if I'm looking at this map, the numbers where I see at the bottom, 400, 500, 500, 1100, those are the amount of people that, and that was around 1755?
It started then.
This
Yeah.
is amazing to me. So this was before we were a country here in the States. So this is new to me. This is a great learning experience. This map really shows and if you notice too, it looks like, is it New Yorkish area or between there? It had 2000.
Well, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. I think that number probably represents the multiple states.
Multiple states. And it's really interesting because I would have never guessed that as well. I mean, the Maine was interesting. Now, what do the green arrows represent in the map? Are they migrating once they get to?
Well, Acadians wanted to go back.
Oh.
Did not. This was a forced deportation. Acadians didn't want to leave. So in some cases, people tried to go back. Also, some were deported or escaped to Quebec, which is why today there's many Acadians in Quebec.
And this brings a good question. Where would the largest population be as of today?
We're looking at some population statistics today. And I think the largest number outside of France is Quebec. Correct me, Giselle, if you think it's different.
For the Acadians, it might be New Brunswick.
New Brunswick.
Okay.
Brunswick.
Canada, New Brunswick.
Well, it's definitely going to be, if we're outside of France, it's definitely going to be in Canada, you would say.
Yeah.
Did they travel to the islands?
Which islands are you thinking of?
The Caribbean islands or anything like that?
Yes, there were Acadians who went to Santo Domingo, Haiti. Quite a good population there. And I think another island, I don't recall the name of it. I don't work with that location very much, but
I was thinking that, with the New Orleans type of entry, I can imagine they were also down around those waters as well and going in. It kind of is interesting. You add all these numbers together. This was just 1755, though. There were other time periods with large amounts of individuals.
Many more were deported from Ile Saint-Jean, PEI, and Ile Royale.
And then just to recap this particular map, so they came to what is now the United States. This was not; these were colonies at the time. And then we discussed the green arrows, and you briefly touched on they wanted to go back. I see the big arrow to England. So they came across the ocean, it got dumped here, and then they said, we want to leave. And so then in this particular time period, 1100 went back to England. They
did not want to do that.
They did not want to go to England.
All of these deportations were forced.
Okay.
They really would have preferred to stay. And the reason the British got into the deportations is because the French would not sign the oath of allegiance to the King of England. Because the King of England, well, there were a number of reasons. One is he was not Catholic, and all the Acadians were Catholic. And they didn't want to be in a position of being ostensibly loyal to the King of England, who was fighting wars with the French. They would have been put in a very difficult position if they signed that oath of allegiance.
So when you see that they went to England in this map, they did not want to go.
Right.
And is there certain parts of England that they stayed and remained, or did most of them scatter because they did not want to be there?
They were imprisoned for the most part.
Wow.
So they went to the prisons that had for them. And later, many of them were then deported again to France.
Same generation.
Yes, same people.
Can you imagine? I mean, for us in modern times, just to go fly across the ocean is a big deal. It takes time. But can you imagine these people are getting deported back and forth, left and right? And it ain't the same person, same generation. This is amazing.
The same person might have been born in Nova Scotia, ended up moving to Ile Saint-Jean, then ended up getting deported to England, then got sent to France, and then many voluntarily wanted to go to Louisiana. So that could have been at least five moves.
This is amazing information. I am so glad that you guys joined. I don't know about you guys that are watching. This is a big education, because if you're looking at this, and if you're in parts of Europe, or if you're in parts of the States or Canada, this is history that I don't know about everybody else. I don't learn this in my history classes, and my son is in college, and I can tell you for sure he did not learn this in high school or any type of environment. So this is fascinating information. I'm still kind of blown away how much they traveled in their own lifetime. In this time frame, this was rough travel.
It was, and many of the Acadians who were deported, they were all deported by ship. These are all ships taking them to these various places. Several of the ships going to France ended up in violent storms. They ended up sinking, losing some or all of their passengers. Many whole families just disappeared.
That's what was my next question. Did they travel as a family, and then their whole family would disappear?
Yes.
And that would be sometimes the end of that line.
Yes.
And you know, we always talk about sources as genealogists, but on WikiTree as well, there is really no source for died at sea. There's no death certificate that's going to be issued back then. You might have the ship went down and they were listed on the ship.
Yes.
But as far as the death certificate, you're not going to find that. And I'm going to ask you to expand on this, because I thought Carol asked a fantastic question since we're talking about this. Did any fight with the colonists against the British during the American Revolution? And I love Giselle's answers, that we're going to discuss this later. So watch, because I think that's a brilliant question. Who do these individuals like and defend? America wasn't America yet, and you've got the British there. So it's going to be a fascinating topic. Thank you for asking that, Carol. And Giselle, you've got your homework now for the second half of that as well. And I got to agree, I did not know any of this. This is why I love WikiTree. I love bringing the projects on WikiTree Bingo. A lot of people think, oh, there's prizes in this. Bingo is like a kid game. And it is, and there are. But we learn so much from you guys that are working on this project. So thank you for working on the project and keeping everything kind of shipshape on it as well, but bringing the knowledge that you have to us, because this is amazing. I'm kind of blown away by what I was not taught.
I feel like I learn something new every day. And I am very thankful for all of our project members who contribute. I mean, there's a lot of really knowledgeable people involved.
And I think that's the power of WikiTree. A lot of times I will tell everybody the power of WikiTree is when two projects can share information. A DNA project can probably pretty much share with all the projects, but you have the One Name Studies that could share with this project, or One Place Studies is fabulous with this project. Well, but also the power of WikiTree is having others that are located globally bring the information or work on profiles as well. Everybody has their expertise and their little bits of information that they can bring to a project. So if those of you are watching and you're not a member of a project, definitely look at the list of WikiTree projects. And if one interests you, check it out. And I always tell people, if you have any questions about a project, reach out to the project leaders, because I can tell you, we are so passionate about our projects. We don't always know everything. We're always happy to say, oh, I learned something new today. But we're also extremely passionate about sharing our knowledge and our love with the topic of our project. So definitely that. Okay, let's play the first bingo game. Are you ladies ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so for everybody that is watching that is new, and a refresher, let me bring it up, a refresher for everybody that has played before. This is the way that we play bingo. I've dropped the link in the chat a couple times. It's also at the very top of the chat for the bingo, first bingo card. And what happens to win bingo is you've got to either get it diagonally, horizontally, or vertically on a row, and you will notice that the free space is there in this card, and it is the Acadian flag. So go ahead and use your mouse and click on that free space now. If you ever click on a spot that you didn't want to click on, just click on it again, and that little splotch, that little dabber splotch will go away. Bingo does go fairly quickly. I will warn everybody, we've got the words from the project. They're going to briefly explain each word, but then we're going to move on. If you have a question about anything that we discussed during bingo, make sure to drop it in chat and we'll try and answer any questions. The other things that I want to mention about bingo, if you've won in the last 6 months, you are not allowed to win another prize until 6 months has passed, but you can still play. And that brings me to the last thing I want to mention about bingo. You will see people say, bingo, keep playing. That means that they're having fun. They're enjoying playing along with us, but they have probably won a prize and they can't win again for a couple more weeks. So that means keep playing. The first person who gets all in a row, either vertically, diagonally, or horizontally, and screams at me in chat, bingo, is the first person to win the prize. And I mention that because 5 people could win at the same time, but it's whoever's the quickest to type bingo in the chat wins. And I'm going to rely on everybody to yell at me that somebody has bingo as well. Okay, ladies. So tell me one more time. We know we talked about this beforehand. This first bingo card is based on certain topics. Mm-hmm. Which topics?
So what we did was divided it basically into the early years of Acadia and then the deportation and later years.
Okay, so this bingo card will be the early years. You guys ready? Okay, Giselle, I think this is all you.
Well, I think this is Mike. I'm going to do the first one.
Okay. Sorry, Cindy. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the French word for a horned beast.
Oh.
It's used in the census. Usually cows.
1604.
1604 was when the very first explorers made a settlement in what is now Maine.
And I should have known, when you mentioned the national park, I should have known that that had something to do with it. In France or French?
French. Well, everybody came from France. Fishermen. So while many Acadians were farmers, there were some people who were fishermen, including the Native Americans who lived there first.
You know what I forgot to ask you? So when we talked about the people when they were deported, why were they deported?
Well, we did talk about that in that the root of the problem was they wouldn't sign the oath of allegiance and become British subjects.
But they were in France. Did they get deported from France first?
They came from France. They were in Acadia. The British legally had won Nova Scotia and got it by treaty.
Yeah.
So they were the governing body of the land, but they wanted the Acadians to do more to
the Legion. So when they left France on their own to come to the colonies? Okay, that's the part I missed. Okay.
Yep. And I saw somebody asked a question about the filles du roi, and there were a couple of Acadian women who were filles du roi, but most of those were in Quebec.
Okay. Indigenous. This is going to be an interesting topic as well.
Indigenous. Well, there were many Indigenous people already there. Mm-hmm. Native American. Well, not Native Americans. It would be covered by the First Peoples Project. Mm-hmm. Of Canadians, and the Indigenous people and French people intermarried in many of those early years.
And I will point out too that we just talked about the First Peoples of Canada with Amy from Canada. We talked to her about this in a bingo right around the beginning of July, I believe, because it was close to Canada Day. Okay. This is an interesting one I learned about today.
Yeah, so Antoinette Saint-Étienne de la Tour, probably could say that more Frenchy, but I don't have the accent like Giselle does. She was a very early woman. I think she was the first female born in Acadia.
And we have her profile. I think her profile. So hold that thought, and we'll show you, because I spent some time reading this profile, and I think I might as well give a shout out to Murray, who is a member of your project, that also shared some Acadian profiles with me. New Brunswick, and we talked about New Brunswick earlier, in a large population.
Yes, and as the deportations started in Nova Scotia, many people went to New Brunswick to escape that and established forts there in defense of Acadia in New Brunswick. Penobscot, one of the indigenous tribes out of the area of Maine. And there's actually some pretty well-known Acadian mothers who were Penobscot. The same with Mi'kmaq. This was the primary tribe in Nova Scotia. Many of the natives who married into the French culture were Mi'kmaq. Acadie, the French word for the name of the area, the geography. So we have Acadians, the people, and we have Acadie, the land.
And where's the land at that we're talking about if we say Acadie?
Maine, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia.
So those would be the area. Not in France, though.
Everything, no, not in France.
In France, okay.
Yeah. Catholics. So that was the religion of the French who came, and Catholic priests, thankfully, did a very good job of recording births and deaths. We're very grateful for them.
And keep that in mind, because I have a feeling this topic is going to come up for research.
All right. I have no idea how to say this word, but it means surgeon. Giselle, can you say it?
Chirurgien.
Chirurgien.
Parfait.
Yes. And we have a number of surgeons. And every time I come across one of those surgeons, I think, what was it like to do surgery in Acadie in the 1600s or 1700s? Must have been difficult.
Okay. Is Mark my first one? I think Mark's my first bingo. See, I love it. You can see, ladies, how they got to really yell at me because I get so fascinated by you guys and your bingo words. Okay. Yeah. So it's funny. I was just getting ready to ask are you guys close? Does anybody have any bingos? Carol, please tell me that there were words this time. We had a smaller list this time. So please tell me you had some words kind of to dab with your mouse there. So Mark, congratulations on bingo. This is great. I want to say, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, he won almost exactly 6 months ago. So this is his second time. So this is great that he's in bingo with us. So to get your prize, you can email Eowyn and let her know that you won bingo during the Acadians bingo. She will send you the link to the store, give you the more details, ask probably for details from you as well to get your prize. And it's up to $30 for WikiTree branded product. Again, I want to show this mug, but I'm going to show you guys something else as well, because WikiTree Day is coming up in November. And one of the items that you can also get is the official 15th anniversary of WikiTree Day mug. So while you're watching WikiTree Day activities with the symposium in November, you could be drinking out of your limited edition WikiTree mug. But my favorite's still the bingo mug. I won't lie. So congratulations, Mark. That's pretty cool. Okay, so we're going to change it up just a little bit. We've got a good base. We've got a good history. Now we need to know if we want to work on profiles or if we want to see some of the profiles, then we need to have a little bit of information from you guys. But before we start that, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to drop the second bingo card in the chat so everybody has a chance to bring it up. Okay. Have we answered? I see somebody. I'm not sure what Elias Grace is.
I don't.
And I agree, Carol. This is much better. Several words always went away. We had Greg earlier, and he gave me 50 words per card instead of anything. So it took a while for a couple people just to get one one on there. Okay. Let me go ahead and discuss some of the notables. Now, your notables are pretty amazing notables that you have here. So as we go through the projects on WikiTree Bingo, we talk about these beautiful project pages. These are project pages of the Acadian project that you guys wanted to showcase. So why did you want to showcase this particular one?
Marie-Christine Aubois is interesting because she was a native and she married an Acadian. And
that's interesting.
Yes, and there were not many, but there were mixed marriages at the time. And
it was probably needed to happen. It was a necessity. There's only so many females and males.
Mm-hmm. And they were married in church, and we see in her marriage, not her marriage record, but in some of her children's marriage records, it is written that the mother was Marie Sauvagesse. Sauvagesse in French. In English, it means savage.
Oh.
At the time, it didn't have the negative connotation that it has now. So that's why we know they were native. And what is also interesting is when the priest also wrote in the records, in the children's records, her last name was Aubois, or sometimes Dubois. Now, this is a French name. So if we have no records, we cannot prove that who her father was. There was one Dubois in the census records, but we cannot connect the two. So we don't know if her father was a Frenchman, a Dubois, so she was a métis in reality, or if the priest said Aubois or Dubois means of the wood.
Oh.
So did he mean that she was a native because she came from the wood?
From the woods, and that was how he translated her name.
We don't know.
That's very interesting. So using the word, the definition savage, as well as in the woods. It's interesting too that you guys documented the kind of timeline here too, so you can see how she lived.
Yes.
Time's going on, how she lived. Let's move on to, excuse me, let me go to the top, Renee. And why did you want to showcase this one? And this one kind of was interesting to me because died in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. He was deported to Philadelphia, 1755. René, he was born in Port-Royal, but then the family moved to Grand Pré because at one point there were not enough space. All the land was occupied, so they moved to Grand Pré, and the land was more fertile there in Grand Pré. And René was a notary. He could sign his name. We can see his signature in one of the marriage records, which was very, very rare at the time.
I would think so, especially for the location. You've got deportations, you're moved around, and he had some education.
What is particular about René is he was married 3 times, and he had 22 children.
Oh my, he was busy.
He was busy.
He had to make sure to take care of all their kids. So as we go through, look at this. Not only did he have that triplet, twin. Oh my.
He had a set of triplets and 3 sets of twins.
Oh.
And the first woman he married, she was a widow, and she had 6 children from her previous marriage.
Oh my.
So, no. And when he had his last child in 1748, he was 66 years old.
That's a lot of what we would call today diapers. And I thought this was interesting too. So was taken prisoner by the Indians in his own home as well. This is just a really fascinating read of someone's life. So when we talk about doing profiles in WikiTree and adding to their biography, we want to not only know their life, but what was going on around their time frame of their life too. And you guys have done a really great job of showcasing both of those. Let's move on to Joseph. Do you say Joseph, or in French, how do you say Joseph?
Joseph.
Okay. I thought it was going to be a little different. And why is this one special to you?
Joseph Broussard, very often we just call him Beau Soleil Broussard, because Broussard was Beau Soleil was his D name. You can see here other last names, but we often call him Beau Soleil Broussard. We don't know where the D name comes from. There are different hypotheses. Some say maybe it's because he had a big red beard. Beau Soleil means a beautiful sun. We don't know. But the village that he lived in, near Moncton, New Brunswick, it was called after him, Village des Beaux Soleils. And what's special about Beau Soleil Broussard is he was an Acadian hero, a real live Acadian hero. He, from the age of 22 to his death, he was part of the Acadian resistance in Acadia, and the Mi'kmaq were his friends. He learned guerrilla warfare from them.
Wow.
And he organized Acadian groups to attack in British forts and encourage them to keep on fighting. He managed to escape deportation, and that was very rare. But finally, around the 1760s, he had to surrender to the British soldiers with his family because they were starving, and they were hiding in the woods for many, many years. But
so this is when we talk about some of the heroes for each particular project. This is one that is a hero to the Acadians for fighting back and protecting what was his.
Yes, he was imprisoned until 1764, and then in 1764, when the prisoners were freed, he decided to bring his family and many other Acadians to Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti. But the weather, the climate there, and the tropical diseases were Acadians couldn't deal with that. So then he brought them to Louisiana, 1765. And in Louisiana, he's very, very popular. Anyone who is connected to Beau Soleil Broussard, it's a badge of honor.
And we'll talk briefly too about how you have a particular DNA sub-project as well. So keep that in mind, everybody. We'll talk briefly about that too, because I imagine that might be able to help connect ancestry lines. Now, this is one that was in bingo. Murray brought this up to me as well. This was one of his favorites. I think I got this one right. Is this one right? Is this one of the ones that I think that you guys also brought up? There was one that was, I'm not sure if this one is the one that was a nun.
Yes, Antoinette Landry.
Okay.
Yes, she's one of my favorites too.
Oh,
It's
tell us why.
So well done, so well written, and it's a very good description of what life was like in Port-Royal in the late 1600s, and it also explains the importance of women in Acadie for the success of the settlements. And women were very busy at the time.
I can imagine, because raising children, but they also had chores. They had the home chores, but they also helped on the land, I imagine, as well.
And the Acadians lived in very tight-knit communities, so they were also helping each other out. If a house needed to be built or a dike built or repaired, they were always there for each other. So they were very busy.
And I love the photos here because I assume that these are places that you can visit to see how they lived as well. So I find this really interesting. This profile is so well done.
Yes.
Just to talk about this, and it's as much was available, nothing without labor. So when we're talking this time frame, whether you're a child or a parent or a grandparent, everybody worked to survive.
Yes.
And I think we find this across the world, that's what happened. I think we also lose kind of fact of that we have it easy now. But this was a group of people that had to do the same thing that many around the world had to do to survive. You had to work very, very hard with labor, but they were also in this phase of constantly being deported as well, and have to fight for their lives sometimes, or their claims to their land. So that brings a different element into their day-to-day life.
Yeah.
This is a great profile. I agree with you. This is amazing.
What I like is in the middle of the profile, there's a description by Villebon, 1699. He was there in Port-Royal, and he described what he saw there. So he saw pear trees and apple trees and parsnip and turnips and fowl and partridge. So it gives us a good idea of how people lived at that time.
How they lived, how they ate, how they survived as well. And this is another reason why I like this, because you have it both in English and French.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a fabulous example of a multicultural, multi-language profile that can be done. It's just really great. It is a really nice profile. And you can see, if you're looking at my cursor over on the right, you can see I'm probably not even halfway there. And this still has so much detail left to go. So I think it's really fantastic, the work that your project has done. So when is your starting point? What year is your starting point, would you say, for your profiles in your project? Because this is 1618.
1600s.
1600s. Okay.
1604.
1604 is when the first people came, but she was born in 1618 in France. And she happens to be my 8th great grandmother.
Oh, that's great.
And she is married to Antoine Bourg, who was one of the first settlers. They came together, and he was born in 1609.
And I think it would be proper to mention too, because we're dealing with these time frames, sources are not as easy to come by as if they were 1900. So that's a little bit why this particular project, they don't have a trail or the learning trail that you're used to seeing in some of the large projects. But what they have requested, again, that you've signed an honor code, that you've worked on WikiTree for a minimum of 30 days, but they also want you to work with some of the profiles. And if you need help finding a profile or asking if you've done the profile correctly, then reach out to one of these ladies and let them know, because they want to see your edits and they want to help you with this, to kind of get an idea that these are not easy profiles. These are not easy to source. They're not easy to track. If you've got a lot of migration coming and going from the deportations as well, and just these time frames, it's tough. So definitely, as you're reaching out to them, reach out to them with a profile that you've worked on and let them see what you've got.
And we love to help. We love to help people get connected to their families.
That's great. And that truly is, I was thinking today, that truly is the power of WikiTree. We were talking earlier, we're trying to find missing cousins. And I can see where that would relate into this project as well, because sometimes when we go back this far, we just don't have all the necessary sources in the documents that make life easy for us now. And these ladies can definitely help you. And what I love about both of you too is you've got the English and the French. So you can help translate. One of you could do English, one of you could do French, or both, and help us out when we get stuck in language, documents in a different language. So I really love that about this project as well. Let's see. Do any of these Acadian profiles reach back to France to see those ancestors?
Yes, indeed. Many are not connected to parents because we don't know who they are, but some of them are connected. And I've recently been working on a family that was found in the 1671 census, but then nothing was found out about them afterwards. So I put a note on G2G and got help from a French person who found people from that family in Belgium and other places back in France, back in Europe, I should say. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there are definitely linkages. And then post-deportation, many of them stayed in France, lived and died there, had children there. So, we also have that French connection
back. And do you have a lot going back and forth? Like, it was interesting to see the Philadelphia. So do you have a lot going back and forth between what we now call the States and Canada as well? But I'm going to guess you don't have a lot, maybe indigenous that moved, or did the indigenous also picked up in this deportation?
I think by then most of the indigenous who had married into the French culture had already passed away.
Okay.
Because that happened in much more in the 1600s.
Okay. Because I was like, that would be an odd thing to pick up those in deport as well.
The Philadelphia connection was because of deportation. It wasn't a voluntary going back and forth with Philadelphia. It was they landed there as a result of the deportation.
It's very fascinating to think that they, as the profiles we just saw, they lived, they survived, and they were surviving, and then they were deported and had to start from scratch all over again. Like you said, they didn't have much. And for us to think, okay, we're going to lose where we're living, where we're sitting right now is going to go away at midnight, and then we're going to be thrown in a different country, a different place. Sometimes it sounds like different language as well. And we have nothing, like you said, just clothes on your back. This is just hard to imagine how we weren't taught about this group of people.
And maybe your family was even split up.
Oh.
And men went somewhere and the women went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And Carol is bringing us again to a really nice point, the sources. And so let's talk about research. Is that going to be the next step that you guys want to kind of dig into? How do we research? Because these are older profiles. So where would you like me to start with? Do you want me to start with the reliable sources?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So we have many sources. The majority have links that you can see the sources online, and there are also prepared citations for each source.
Oh, that's great.
Very, very easy to use.
I told you guys this project has made it so simple for us as well. You guys have really done a fantastic job on your pages.
Thanks to Cindy's talents for organization.
And your talents for research, Giselle.
Well, congratulations. And you can see that you have the citations right here. So you would simply just copy, modify if you need to, but you've got the church records. So we've got some of the Acadian church records going back. And I'm going to assume they're also in different locations as well.
Yes.
And then there's Port Royal. We've talked about that a little bit today.
Yes.
So this is really great that you've given us this information, and we can go and search it. Or if I click on some of these links, will that take me to the actual parish registers?
Some are transcriptions.
Okay.
You can click on the
On this, because my question is also, is it free to search?
It's all free.
Okay.
All free. There you have to click on name of a town and then the year. So maybe we can look at another one.
Yeah, in this one, I'll tell you that because I've got my screen so blown up so everybody can see, it's hard to kind of see when I click on something. But it's interesting how these sources are here. I wish I had these sources for listed like this and so many for the province of Georgia for the colonial periods. We have some, but we don't have them at this extent. Now, this is interesting because I'm looking now at lists of soldiers and sailors and poor people who died in the hospital.
Yes.
And this is 1736. This is starting at. That's amazing.
The majority of these records are in French. Some are translated in English, but the majority are in French.
And that's where Giselle comes handy for us because you can help us with this.
Anytime.
I'm
curious.
People
can ask G2 on G2G. Also. Always generous volunteers, always ready to translate.
I'm curious too. So when I'm searching through a lot of these, will I see that D name, or most of them have the more formal name?
Some have the D name.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually how we know they used it.
Oh, okay.
If it's a marriage and the D name is used, or if they were a father and the D name was used, then we know.
You can click maybe on marriages or baptism at St. Joseph's Church in Philadelphia.
Oh, one of my favorites places, Internet Archive as well.
Those are in English. They're transcriptions. But Acadians who were married there after being deported there.
This is fabulous. And I will say we use Internet Archive quite frequently with the Southern Colonies Project as well. And this is great information, great record as well. And you give us the link.
Mm-hmm.
You give us a citation.
Yes.
To include.
And actually, for somebody coming into the project, taking one of these sources and working through all the people that are mentioned to get that source onto existing profiles and new profiles is a good project for somebody.
So if you do have Acadians and you want to learn a little bit more about their sources and how they are researching and finding the records and the citations that they are using to be consistent throughout the entire project. Every project has different consistencies in citation requests. They're giving you all this information. So if you have these ancestors, you want to start looking at them, a great way is to help the project out by including some of the researching, including some of these citations. Now, I know you mentioned Wall of Names.
Yes.
And the Wall of Names, what exactly is that? Is that a statue? Is it a memorial? Is it a monument?
It's a list of about 3,000 names of Acadian refugees who settled in Louisiana between 1764 and 1785. No Acadians were deported to Louisiana. We think that they were deported there because there are so many Cajuns. But
Mhm.
no, they went there voluntarily. And so these names are engraved on a wall at the Acadian Memorial in St. Martinville, Louisiana. And it's sort of a pilgrimage for people who have Acadian ancestors to go there and look at the wall and see their ancestors who were there.
And just from bringing this up, I'm already fascinated. I'm seeing France. I'm seeing other places. I'm seeing Baltimore, Maryland. So even though we talked about the particular areas, Acadians could have come from all different areas.
Those who immigrated to Louisiana, they came from majority two places. First, from Acadia.
Mm-hmm.
They were freed from prisons in 1764. There were a few thousand who went to Louisiana. And then there were those who were in France, who were deported to France and to England, who left France. They couldn't, Acadians had their own identity, even if France was their homeland. They couldn't get used to the customs there and the way of living. So when the Spanish offered them to go to Louisiana, 1785, about 1,500 went from France to Louisiana on 7 ships. So these are the people on the wall of names. So if someone, like for example your husband, if they want to know if their ancestors were one of the first settlers in Louisiana, there is a category,
Mm-hmm.
Acadians on the wall of names.
Mm-hmm.
So they can find with the relationship finder or the connection finder,
Mm-hmm.
they can see if they're connected to any person who was on the wall of names.
Now, let me ask you this, since we're talking about research. If I have a suspicion, but I have Acadian in my family, but I have no idea really where to start. My records go that they were maybe the parents were listed in a child's marriage, but I have no idea where those parents lived really, or born, or died. Would you recommend then, if I know that the children were listed as Acadian, would you recommend then that I maybe switch over to your DNA project?
DNA, yes. If they had DNA tested,
Mm-hmm.
and check with the Mothers of Acadia project
Mm-hmm.
also, and the DNA project. Yes, and
And I know this is a very large project for you guys, and you have a particular person who works solely on this particular one. And I want to make sure that we mention the person. Who is it that works on?
Denis Sabar. He's the coordinator of Acadians project, and he's also the administrator of the Mothers of Acadia, or Acadia DNA project. He was chosen by Lucie Leblanc Constantino,
Mm-hmm.
who passed on the reins to Denis Savard. So he's the expert on DNA.
And I think this is going to family tree DNA, the one that I've got highlighted in yellow. So if you think that you have some Acadian, you might want to spend some time on the project's DNA page. Look around. If you have any questions, reach out. But also look around, click on some of the links that do go to project pages with example family tree DNA, and see if you can dig into the DNA a little bit to find that missing link, if you believe you're Acadia or not. And maybe you'll be able to solve your mystery that way and say, well, I thought we were, but we were not, or we were Acadians. So because I think that when you're talking about your project dealing with profiles from a very long time ago and trying to get the project completed with these originals, like the wall of names and things like that, that's a little bit further back in DNA might be the missing link to help you.
It might be, but I wouldn't rule it out. So if you didn't find your family connection on any of the DNA sources, contact one of us, because we might be able to find, if you know somebody,
Mm-hmm.
we might be able to find the linkages for you.
And I guess the other question that I have real quick is, if I have a name that sounds French with a large population, say in Canada or Maine, that might not mean that I'm necessarily Acadian as well. But there's a chance that the better chance you are. But I just want to caution people before you put a sticker on your profile to kind of assume that you are. Have a little bit of a paper trail to go back.
Many Québécois also immigrated to the United States. So,
and that's interesting too. That's a good way to also segue into our second bingo card here. So if everybody will bring up your bingo card, let me bring this down real quick. Okay, now Giselle, I think this one's going to be your turn for the bingo words. So I just want to remind everybody very quickly that we are going to go fast. We'll go a little bit faster because we're running a little bit over, but diagonally, vertically, horizontally, get them all the way across. First person that gets that and yells bingo in the chat is the winner. You cannot win if you've won within 6 months. So, Mark, you cannot win a second mug tonight. Okay, exile.
Exile. About 10,000 people were deported, 10,000 Acadians. And so a lot of exiles around the world, France, England, New England colonies. And there is a sub project with the Acadians Project. It's the Acadians in Exile Project, started by Jacqueline Giroir.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to trace everyone who was in exile.
That's great. In 1763, why is this date important?
Signing of the Treaty of Paris. It ended the 7 Years' War. Ile Saint-Jean, now Prince Edward Island. First residents were Mi'kmaq, and about 3,000 Acadians were deported to France from there, 1758.
I just got to pause real quick. When we keep talking about, I'm still just kind of picturing this. They're not going to support the local government. The locations no longer want them. They want them gone for various reasons, probably too. They probably want their land as well. But so they just say, okay, you guys, we're removing you. We're deporting you. And they go.
For example, in Grand Pré, in Nova Scotia, there were 400 boys and men were summoned to the church under false pretext. They said, come for a meeting. And they were imprisoned there, 1755. And then they said, okay, now you're prisoners. Your property we're taking your property, prepare for deportation in 30 days.
Wow.
And they lost everything. And after 1763, those who wanted to return to their homeland, their homestead was either destroyed or occupied by an English settler.
That was my guess, that they wanted that land and somebody else moved in, and where are they going to go?
Yeah. Ile Royale is now Cape Breton. There again, 1758, a second wave of deportations. Thousands of Acadians were deported to France. Prisoner. thousands of Acadians were in prisons and in Acadia, in England, in New England colonies also. Women were responsible for bringing food and clothes to the
Oh, wow.
prisoners. And sometimes they hid necessary tools for them.
So all the way back then they were doing it. Company of friends.
For Carol, she asked that question. In 1776, a man from Massachusetts, a Mr. Eddy, had a great idea of invading Nova Scotia to make it the 14th American colony. So he gathered militiamen and he moved up north to Nova Scotia. And on the way, he recruited Acadians, about 18 young Acadians, so they were part of the American Revolutionary War, and they attacked Fort Cumberland, but where they had been imprisoned there 13 years earlier, but it didn't go as planned. So.
Well, it's still part of Canada. The wall names we discussed with that. Now, let me just make sure I understand correctly. So the wall of names, there's only one wall of names per se, and that's in Louisiana.
Yes,
okay.
St. Martinville. Broussard is our famous Au Soleil Broussard. When Broussard, he was accused of fathering a child under out of wedlock, and it appears that when the lady, the woman who had the child, when she gave birth, she shouted his name.
Oh,
and at the time, under British law,
that's all you needed.
That's all you needed. So he was accused and he went to prison.
Oh my. Oh my. Oh, military. We had military guys. I think we kind of explained that. And the British that was kind of the bad guys for the Acadians.
Yes, but in 2003 they apologized to the Acadians.
2003.
Yes, the Queen Elizabeth II signed a royal proclamation saying that they recognize the wrongdoings by the crown.
Very interesting. That's interesting. So not a year or two later, but it still came. Yeah. Winslow's list.
It's a census that was ordered by Colonel Winslow. He was the man responsible for deporting the Acadians from Grand Pré. So he ordered, when the men were imprisoned at the church, he wanted a list of all the men and the number of children and livestock, number of livestock and everything, because he wanted to make sure he had enough boats, ships, to deport them to the New England colonies. So it's known as Winslow's list. Yes.
Escape.
Yes. Now we know that the women sometimes brought the necessary tools and everything, and there are interesting stories about famous escapes. For example, in my family, my fourth great-grandfather, Pierre Annanette Cormier, it appears that he escaped from prison dressed as a woman, supposedly.
Okay, now I got to ask, how do you know that?
It's a legend. But Stephen White, the expert genealogist, he's skeptical about that version. And he proposes maybe another version that's on Pierre Annanette's profile.
I can definitely see that, especially after you mentioned that the women brought, not only food, but items as well. So I can see how he could have gotten clothing that was brought to him as well to
put on extra layers of skirts.
I can see that. Okay, so we've got a bingo winner. I think Chris was the bingo winner on the word escape. That's kind of funny. So congratulations, Chris, on that. That's a great job. And Chris, is this your first time at bingo as well? That would be beginner's luck. You're going to email Eowyn at wikitree.com. She is our forest elf, our tree elf, and she will get you the information, the link, and tell you all the details on what you can get. It's a WikiTree branded item, so keep that in mind. And the price, I think it's $30 is the price point for that. So congratulations again, Chris. Thanks for joining us as well. And ladies, is there something that we've left off before we say goodbye?
Well, I wanted to say we picked this date to play with Tree Bingo because of two important Acadian celebrations. The first one is July 28th, so just passed, which is the day of commemoration of the Great Upheaval, which we've been talking about with the deportations. They celebrated the 250th anniversary in 2005 in Grand Pré.
Wow.
And then the second day comes after, in a week and a half, which is Acadian Day. And that'll be celebrated August 15th. And they had the first National Acadian Convention in 1881. And they've been doing that, I believe, every year since then.
Now, would Acadian Day be a celebration, maybe in slightly smaller scale, but still as important as Canada Day or 4th of July or Bastille Day? Or would it be a celebration where families come together and they celebrate? The culture would be to bring certain foods or events or music as well?
The tradition is to have a tintamarre.
Mm-hmm.
That's a parade. Everybody comes together and they have pots and pans and spoons, and they make a noise and they walk in town. That's a tintamarre.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. And do they have certain typical foods that does the Acadian culture have typical foods that they still to this day love and make? I know that, when we talk about Cajuns, we know the Cajun food. But if we're talking more in Canada or the northern United States, would it be fishing? Some type of fish that's more Acadian? If I wanted to impress somebody and bring them a particular dish, what would that be?
In New Brunswick, it would be poutine râpé. That's an acquired taste. That's how I knew my husband loved me, when he said it was good. But I think it's delicious. It's a boiled potato with pork in the middle. Poutine râpé, and there's also râpure, again potato and pork. Very simple dishes
that they grew. They survived on as well wherever they traveled.
Yeah.
I use the word travel loosely. I should say wherever they were deported to. Well, I want to thank you guys for being part of this. Like I said, I've been really excited about you guys coming onto the bingo because I reached out to Cindy a while ago, and I knew that you were picking certain days that you wanted to come on. So you've been on our bingo list for a while, and I want to also mention that you were a special request. Your project was a request to come on to our bingo, and that's another reason why we reached out. So if you guys that are watching want to see a project that has not been showcased on our bingo so far, definitely reach out to us, to me, and especially reach out to your project leaders and tell them, hey, let's be on bingo because I have questions. Again, I want to mention that if you want to join the project, go to the project page that we've listed in the description down below. It's also on WikiTree's project page, and it's also been in our chat at the very top. They would like you to begin honor code 30 days on WikiTree, and also try creating an Acadian profile or helping edit and add sources to current ones. And when you do that, definitely reach out to these two ladies. They're very friendly, very accommodating. They love sharing their knowledge and getting to know you as well. And for those of you that are watching live, thank you so much for spending your Friday with us today. This has been a great learning experience for me. I think this is the bingo that I've learned the most from. So I appreciate both of you joining us. And if you're watching us after the fact, thank you for joining us as well. And make sure to check out the Acadian Project page. Thank you, ladies. That was great.
It was really fun.
It was really great.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.